Welcome, good to see you. I'm excited as always, even though I've had another bad night of sleep, but hey, won't complain about that. Although I just did. We're going to continue our sermon series on discipleship that we're in now. This is week 7 of 8, so, almost there. What more can we learn about discipleship? We've been talking about our life as disciples of Jesus, what that means, and we spent 2 weeks on kind of understanding that we are followers of Jesus, and then 2 weeks on us as students of Jesus, and then 2 weeks on us as confidants of Jesus. He tells us things, we hear from him, and this intimate relationship with him. And now we're going to spend the last 2 Sundays on us as ambassadors of Jesus. We are ambassadors of Jesus. And the main thing that I want you to take home today, the main idea, the main kind of encouragement is this: you are called into full-time ministry. You are called into full-time ministry. Now, in the church, we often talk about, ministry, and certainly full-time ministry, as we understand it as like church work or work for a Christian organization, and sometimes that's talked about as the ultimate or like a higher calling. I disagree. I believe that according to the Bible, every single Christian, and I hope that you're one of them, every single Christian is called into full-time ministry. Not to full-time church work stuff, but full-time ministry in the place where you are, the place that you have in life, the place where you spend your everyday life, the work that you do, the family that you are part of, the neighborhood that you're part of. So you're not called necessarily into vocational ministry, but definitely into full-time ministry. And so I'm here to kind of commission you in that role, in that calling, to confirm it, to hopefully inspire it a little bit, and kind of send you out into another week as a representative of Jesus, as an ambassador of God's kingdom. I want to go to our key verse today, and that's this 1 Corinthians 7, verse 17, which says, "Let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him." So live the life that God has assigned to you. So where you are right now, what you do right now, you are called there. You're called into that place. In church we sometimes talk about, I wonder what my calling is. And one day I'll hope to find my calling, and I'll understand what God's will is, what God's plan is for my life. And I'm thinking, I don't know what God's plan is for my life. So far, He's led me here, and it's been pretty cool. And I'm more concerned about, am I living the way of God? Am I living the way of Jesus? Than, what's the next step? Am I living plan A, maybe plan B? As you can hear, I'm not a Calvinist, or plan C or plan D. So I want to give you a little bit of context for this verse. How is Paul phrasing this? Why is Paul saying this to this church? Well, Corinth was a big Greek city, a big portal for commerce and culture. And the church in Corinth was a very diverse church. If you read through the whole letter and also the second letter to the Corinthians, you'll see that there's a lot of diversity there. There's Jews and Gentiles. There's, of course, men and women, but that's also like a little bit of a thing then. And there's definitely upper class and lower class represented in that church. And the Corinthians really loved their gatherings. They loved coming together, and they felt very spiritual. They felt like super spiritual. Their meetings were sometimes very messy because of it, because they were all super spiritual and speaking in tongues and prophesying, like very messy. But they were excited, like they were passionate for God, but in a somewhat immature way. So that passion Paul confirms, but then he also has a lot of things to say to this church about, kind of growing up and becoming more mature in their faith. So in these letters, he's talking about a lot of kind of specific situations on how to deal with them, how to kind of mature in them. And this verse comes in the middle of a passage where Paul kind of speaks into the everyday life of the people, Because many felt so spiritual that they felt like, the world is contaminating me. I shouldn't be spending all this time, working, or like if they, if for example, a man came to faith and his wife wasn't a Christian, and he was like, he's like, contaminating me with her non-Christianness, and or the other way around, the woman would, become a Christian and the husband is not, and she's like, should I leave this marriage? Should I maybe find someone else? What is God saying? And some felt that you needed to get circumcised according to Jewish tradition to be, very spiritual. And they were kind of standing there, knife in hand, like, is this what you want me to do, God? And Paul says, no, put the knife down slowly. No, that's not it. He says, kind of stay where you are. Stay where you are. They felt like they were so excited, but immature. They felt like, I need to make a sort of radical change in my everyday life to be able to really serve God. I need to kind of leave everything behind. And Paul says, no, hold on. Stay where you are. Let each person lead the life that God has assigned to him and to which God has called him. So that he says, don't leave the work that you do or the marriage that you're in or the if you're a Jew or a Gentile. You don't have to change that. You don't have to undo anything. It's all right. It's good. You're called into the life that you are leading now. The world is not contaminating you. In fact, you are actually sanctifying the world. So you're sanctifying the places that you step into. You're sanctifying the families that you are part of. They're not contaminating you. Your presence sanctifies them. Let me read a bit more in the passage. So starting with that same verse. So let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him, into which God has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. Was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. For neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. Amen. Just saying that as a guy. Each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. Sorry, can't help myself sometimes with jokes. So sorry to confuse you or distract you from Bible reading. So each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. Were you a bondservant, that's the ESV's word for a slave. So were you a slave when called, do not be concerned about it. But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. For he who was called in the Lord is as a bondservant, is a freed man of the Lord. Likewise, he who was free when called is actually a bondservant of Christ. You were bought with a price, to not become bondservants of men. In the Roman Empire in the 1st century, it said that 15 to 20% of the people were slaves. In bigger cities, that could get up to 30%. So in a city like Corinth, let's just roughly say 25% of the people were slaves, lived as slaves, did not have a choice in what their daily life would look like. They were the property of a master. Just looking at the city of Groningen, I actually don't know the numbers, but I think about 25% of the people is students. So let's imagine that everyone who is a student in Groningen would be a slave in the city of Corinth in the 1st century. That's a lot of people. If every student in this city, in this church would be that's a population, they would have a vineyard slave ministry instead of a vineyard student ministry, just to accommodate the needs of that certain group in the church. So these slaves were part of the church as well. There were people that lived as slaves that were part of the church. Possibly there were also slave owners part of the church. So that's a well, let's call it an interesting dynamic in the 1st century church. That's they didn't have any choice in what their life looked like, what their were, and their circumstances were different from like what we think of when we talk about slavery of the 18th century, the slavery that made the Western world so rich, and we shamefully look back at, or modern day slavery. I mean, slavery only expanded. Really, there's more slaves. More people in slavery today than ever any other point in history, living under horrible conditions. So the conditions for a lot of these slaves in the first century were kind of different. Not everyone was exploited and had to work like 16-hour days or something like that. It was in a lot of places more humane, and some could actually gain freedom at some point, and were kind of kept on working for the same family. But definitely, no one liked being a slave, and there was definitely abuse going on. You were still property of a master, you were property of someone, and therefore, they could use you like a tool or like whatever. So no one really liked or enjoyed being a slave. There was no union defending them or anything like that. And so in this Corinthian church, there were slaves, possibly also slave owners, and without any justifications for slavery or treating people as property, Paul says, if you want to serve Jesus, you can do that right where you are. You can even do that living as a slave. Don't risk your life to flee from your master, because that would be, for a lot of people, that would be a suicide mission. He said, you can work as a slave and serve God at the same time. I love how he actually said, like, he does something brilliant here. I don't know if you really noticed that. He says, if you are a slave and you became a Christian, you're actually a free man. So you may be living as a slave, but you are set free. You are a free man in Christ. And then to the slave owners, he says, you are free, or anyone else, like you are a free man, but actually you're also a slave to God. I think it's brilliant what he does there. Like he's like spiritually, you're both a free man, but also a slave to God, and that's a good thing. So he kind of shows that other side of things. In other words, your identity does not lie in your social status, or in your marital status, or in your Facebook status, but it's in the status that you have in Christ. You are set free, made free in Christ. So as a disciple of Jesus, we are his followers, his students, confidants, and his ambassadors. So you are called not out of the world, out of your old life, but then kind of immediately sent back into the life that you are leading as a called one to serve God in the everyday life that you are leading. You don't have to like leave everything behind and move to the Himalayas and be all in super connection with God and live as a hermit or something like that. You can serve God, you can glorify God with your everyday life, your normal everyday life, the things that you're doing right now. And you're called there as an ambassador of the kingdom. You're called right where you are. And so I want to go kind of through three principles that will help us to kind of live that identity of an ambassador of Jesus in our everyday lives. And the first one is, as an ambassador of Jesus, you're called to do everything as for the Lord. Do everything as for the Lord. So in the passage we just read, Paul says, this is what I'm telling all the churches. So let's pick another letter to a different church, see what he says there. There he says, slaves, again, he's speaking into this dynamic. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything that you do. Try to please them all the time, not just when they are watching you. Serve them sincerely, because of your reverent fear for the Lord. Work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. So what Paul's making clear is that your whole life, and certainly also your work, and when I say work, I don't necessarily mean you know, the thing that you do that you're paid for, but any unpaid work as well. If you're a stay-at-home parent, if you're retired, if you do volunteer work, or if you're studying, or whatever it is what you do with your daily life, that's your work, and that's what you're called to, and you do that for the glory of God. When you do it sincerely, when you do it willingly, when you do it diligently. Even if you don't like what you do, you know, it's still better than what slaves did in the first century. Well, but even if you don't like what you do, you can still do it for the glory of God. If you do it wholeheartedly, it's like you do it for Christ himself, like Christ is your boss. I used to think that any secular, normal people's job that I had in the past was just a way of making money, so I could do what I'm kind of called to do. So for a long time, I was working in a church, kind of part-time. Started for 1 day, and then 2 days, 3 days, and of course needed to make a little bit more money than what 2 days at the church would make. And so I had a different job as well. And for fun fact, for 3.5 years, I worked as a barista. Sometimes tell law students that I used to work as a barista, and then they say, "Oh, really? Yeah, at Starbucks." They're like, just a stupid joke. Anyway, so for 3.5 years, I worked at a Starbucks, and I just thought, when I kind of got into that, I've had all kinds of fun jobs, by the way, but I just thought I'm here, make some money, and then get out and do what God has called me to do. But God kind of challenged me on that, like, really? Like, it's a whole day, like it's an 8-hour shift, and why don't you do it for me? Why don't you do it for my glory? Why don't you change your attitude about it? And so I'd come in 6:30 in the morning, ready to work. I'd be like, okay, I want to do this for the glory of God. I want to make the best coffee for all these people that apparently, have the money to get a €5 coffee every morning. It's just going in my head like, okay, that's 20 days a month. That's a lot of money to spend on coffee. Anyway, but kind of doing it with this good attitude and fun with my colleagues, and working hard even when the shift supervisor wasn't looking, and doing it for the glory of God. And then when I would travel home by train, smelling of sweat and coffee and chocolate and whipped cream and strawberry cream and caramel sauce, I would be, let this be, a fragrance of worship unto you and the rest of the train. let it be worship for you. Here's the thing, any job that you can do with a clear conscience, you can do for the glory of God. In fact, I believe that it is in the seemingly unimportant, redundant type of work that we just do because we need to do it, where God is truly shaping character, where He's working. I remember the days when I was, delivering papers or posts, and my hands were cold and it was raining. I was like, that's where He's training perseverance and kind of going at it and like holding on, stuff like that. He is shaping character in me in those times. I'm sure He's doing the same in you. Remember that Adam was a gardener working the ground. It was God's assignment to him. God created human beings to work. Abraham was in real estate. Joseph worked as a high official for a pagan king that thought that he was God. Thought your boss was bad. Moses and David worked for years as shepherds. For most of his life, Jesus worked in construction. He only started his ministry when he was about 30. So probably more than half of his life, in the years before that, more than half of his life, he worked in construction. Can you imagine? That's not the Jesus that you find in the children's Bible, is it? Almost all of our biblical heroes had very normal, secular jobs, like all of us. Whatever it is that you do daily, paid or unpaid, whether you feel that it's meaningful or not, whether you like what you do or not, whether it is what you've always wanted to do or not. Do it as if Jesus is your direct supervisor. Do it as if Jesus is your colleague. Do it as if the person that you're serving is Jesus. Martin Luther King said this: if a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as a Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. Second point. Seeing your workplace as your unique ministry context. So, as an ambassador of Jesus, you need to see your workplace as, for that matter, the place where you spend your everyday life as your unique ministry context. Now, what does that mean? Should I kind of, evangelize my colleagues over lunchtime, or if I work at Thuisbezorgd or Uber Eats, and if I deliver pizza, then a little evangelism track, like, here you go. You read that and you have a great night, something like that. Or if you lead a workshop or a class, then you start with prayer or something like that. Like how much Christian should I be in my workplace? There's some workplaces where you could do stuff like that. I remember in summer work, I would have conversations with colleagues about God and everything, and life, and what I believed and what they believed, and there may be some workplaces filled with those opportunities, but some places are just very close to that. So let me say a few things that will apply to all of us. In the first place, I want you to understand that living as an ambassador of Jesus doesn't always mean evangelism. It doesn't always mean evangelism. I think that first and foremost, it means living your life in the way of Jesus. In the way of Jesus, kind of showing the world that there's a different way to live. It's a lived testimony. It's always preach the gospel, and if necessary, use word. That type of idea. So you live your life for the glory of God in the way of Jesus. You live your life the way that Jesus would live it if he was living it. And quite often, this will mean being countercultural. Like if you work in a very high competitive environment, elbow your way to the top type of place, then you need to figure out how to be in that place, but live differently. Do that differently. Not go along in that way of working. Not go along in that kind of competitiveness, but be different. Be humble. Be like the first will be last and the last will be first. Have that attitude. If there's a lot of gossip and complaining going around at your work about your supervisor or your colleague, try to move away from those conversations. Try to be different. If you have a problem with a colleague or a boss, and in the Netherlands, for those of you from high power distance countries, you can actually have a really good conversation with your boss about it and not get fired most of the time. Just don't, don't send me emails like, I lost my job because of your terrible advisor. In the Netherlands, most of the time, you can actually have a pretty good conversation with your supervisor about stuff you find difficult or don't understand or don't really appreciate about the way that he works. As an ambassador of the kingdom, you bring the life and the values of the kingdom. Jesus said, you guys you're like yeast. You're mixed into this bag of flour. It's like seemingly invisible, but you have an unseen effect. And I just want to say, like every room that you step into, kind of raises the level. Like there's a rising effect, like yeast has in bread that you're preparing. Like it's rising. It rises to a new level. Not because you're so great, because you carry the kingdom. You carry the values of the kingdom. You carry the presence of the Holy Spirit wherever you go. It's not the world that's contaminating you. It could, but if you live in the way of Jesus, you're sanctifying these places. You make a difference where you are. I think that this is at the heart of what we can bring to our workplace as well. Even if there's a whole bunch of things going on that are not God honoring, you can say, I'm here. And you can come with this attitude like, I'm here as an ambassador of Jesus. I see that it's messy. I see that it's, not how I'd like it to be. And it does affect me. I feel the pressure. I feel the stress. But, I believe that there's a different way. And I'm going to live that other way. I'm going to live the kingdom life in the midst of this. And kind of bring this place to a different level. Don't be afraid to live radically different than your colleagues. You are a sent one. You're not just a called one in your workplace, you're also a sent one into that workplace. But then, as we talk about evangelism, I think this is the most one of the most appropriate passages for that, so for in the workplace. 1 Peter 3 says this, you must worship Christ as Lord of your life. So let your life kind of glorify God. Let your life worship Him. And if someone asks this season, and if someone asks about your hope as a believer, then always be ready to explain it. I like this. This is as much evangelism as starting the conversation, is responding to the questions, stepping into the opportunities that other people are giving you. Actually, it's a much better place to start from than, hey, do you know Jesus? Hey, do you know Jesus? Hey, good as that may be, and appropriate as that may be in some, definitely if he prompts you, but you have a different conversation if you start from a good question. You see an opportunity. So if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. But do this in a gentle and respectful way. Keep your conscience clear. Then if people speak against you, they will be ashamed when they see what a good life you live, because you belong to Christ. The thing is, you may very well be the closest thing to Jesus that the people at your work or, again, where you spend your daily life, in your neighborhood, you may be the closest thing to Jesus that they're going to experience. I know it's a scary thing, isn't it? But still, you are a sent one. You are a sent one in that place. You are a sent one into your workplace, into your class, into your neighborhood. So when you live your life differently, opportunities will come. And then I want to say a few things about how you can deal with this. Just a few general advices here. First is take the risk. If there is a clear opportunity to testify in some way about Jesus, about what you experience from Him. If you see an open door, don't be afraid to go in. Even if you estimate the chance of someone actually taking a step closer to Jesus being 1%, it's still worth it. We are talking about eternities here. We are talking about things of eternal value, like that could change your life. You carry a message that changes lives. You do know that. So it is, take the risk. Take the risk. Don't be afraid. I know it is scary. It is scary and uncomfortable. God never called us to comfort, did He? Secondly, go for a conversation, not a discussion. So I've been in so many discussions about God, and I was like, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it because people just want to have a discussion, and I was happy with the VSM event yesterday about postmodernism and how to respond, and coming at this from what's called apologetics. Idea, like we need to believing in God, being a Christian is a reasonable thing to do. It's not a foolish thing to do. It's a very reasonable thing to do. There's from all kinds of sciences you can look at this and see Christianity as a very reasonable thing to do. It's not stupid or foolish to believe or just a fairy tale that you believe in. It's a very reasonable thing to do. But the thing is, reason and discussion and arguments seldom is gonna really convince people. Certainly in this time, it's your testimony that no one can argue with. And so try to go for a conversation instead of like a discussion, in as much as you can control that. Thirdly, be gentle and respectful. Hey, here's what I believe in. Are you interested? And lastly, don't avoid relationships with people that live life differently. Yeah, but they're making all kinds of immoral choices I don't agree with. They're not according to the Bible. Here's what Jesus did with Zacchaeus, the guy, a known thief and traitor in the city of Jericho. He said, can I have dinner at your place? And would you please invite all of your awful friends? I want to hang out with them. I want to get to know you. I want to spend time with you. And then we'll see what happens. So that was Jesus' attitude about people that did not live according to the way of him, according to the laws of God. That was his attitude about it. Don't avoid relationship unless you're very vulnerable to bad influence. You choose your friends carefully, but don't avoid relationships with people just because they are not Christians. Third point. This is a little bit of a longer sermon today, but there was just too much good in there to cut out. I am so sorry, but I'm not. So this was the first half of it. No. Third point. And preachers only have 3 points usually, so here we go. Third point. Living as an ambassador of Jesus means living a healthy work-life balance. Living a healthy work-life balance. You are commissioned into full-time ministry in your everyday life, and so you're called to maintain a healthy work-life balance. So this whole kind of theology of work and vocation comes from Genesis 1 and 2, where God created the heavens and the earth and created Adam and immediately put him to work. Work is good. God created people to work. Work is not bad. Work is fantastic. Work is beautiful. Work is creative. Work is fulfilling. It does something else. We want to, millennials like we want to make a difference. We want to make the world a better place. That's work. That's our design. That's how God created us. God is a creative God, and so He created us with creativity. We want to do stuff. We want to. Actually, Adam was called to extend the beauty of Eden over the rest of the world. God created people to work, to multiply, to extend that beauty all over the world. It's in Genesis 3, in the curse of sin, that the ground is cursed. And so God says, I know this in Dutch, but like you'll be sweating when you make a living. Like work will be hard. So the curse is that work is going to be hard, but not that work is going to be bad. So you're going to be working in the new earth. There'll be work in the Revelation 21 and 22 world. So if you win the lottery, there's countless people who win the lottery, don't have to work for a day in their lives anymore, and are completely unsatisfied and unhappy, and are seeking experiences here and there to kind of fill that. They're made to work. So, what does that curse kind of mean? The ground is cursed. It means that some of the conditions under which you work can be cursed. So, for example, a result of that then is that there's slavery, that people are exploited to work, that there's something like child labor, or people that are forced to work 16 hours or more per day, every day, without a break, without a holiday, anything. With that comes that insecurity, and with the ground cursed, that insecurity in work is from those days, they were living off the ground. So when the weather was bad, or hailstorms came at the wrong time, then the harvest was ruined and there was a famine. And nowadays, insecurity can be you can lose your job at any time, and then what happens? And so it comes with the insecurity. You have to make a living to survive. And with the curse on the ground also comes that sometimes is expressed in workaholism, when people find their identity in their work, which I think in this context is maybe the biggest kind of temptation and the biggest thing where we experience the curse of the ground from Genesis 3. Workaholism is when work becomes an escape, when work becomes your identity or an idol. And so, as we experience that tension, as we experience maybe the temptation to find our identity in our work, or when we experience some of the tensions that come with that curse on the ground from Genesis 3, we need to look back at the blueprint of Genesis 1 and 2 and understand work is beautiful, but we are created to live a good work-life balance. God created Adam on the 6th day. What was the first thing that Adam did? Nothing. He rested on the 7th day along with God, and the creation was sort of in rest. The first thing that he did was diddly squat, nothing. We're made in God's image. We're made to work from a place of rest. Not at the end of a heavy week, crash into rest, put on Netflix, just go, finish a bottle of wine and go to sleep and be like, weekend. No, we are not called to crash into rest, but to live from a place of rest and do beautiful and creative and meaningful work. As disciples of Jesus, we are to model our lives after Him. Now, if anyone in history had a high-pressure job, it was Jesus, because he was training up 12 highly unskilled and guys to kind of take over from him and kind of start a worldwide movement. So that was heavy. People would bring their sick to him to be healed, and he would preach in front of huge crowds and deal with constant criticism and temptation from the devil. And he had quite a literal deadline in 3 years. So yeah, high pressure job. And after sending out his disciples on this mission trip where they experienced all these wonderful things, and they kind of come back with great reports, and then Jesus says this, hey, revival is about to break out. Let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming. See, revival is about to break out. So many people were coming, and Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. You're like, you know what? I'm hungry. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. See, Jesus often did this himself. Like late at night or early in the morning, he'd go off and pray, spend time alone, kind of connect with God again, be in rest. And this is a moment where he's intentionally teaching his disciples that work can always wait. It's important to retreat. It's important to take care of yourself. The inner man, the outer man. You need to take care of your physique. You need to take care of your spirit. You need to take care of your soul. So how can we keep a good work-life balance? In recent weeks, I've heard from or about so many people in our church that are struggling with this, that feel overwhelmed with work. Just there's so much to do, and there's constant pressure, and and I'm not surprised, because we are like the average IQ of our church is not the average IQ of the Netherlands. Like there's a lot of smart people here, not me. I'm kind of bringing that average IQ of the church down, I'm afraid. And so with high level people come, high level jobs and, high pressure stuff. And so there's the type of jobs or the types of studies that you guys do are high level and therefore high pressure. So it's not surprising to me. That's why I find it so important to spend a little extra time today to talk about this and talk honestly about this. I know I cannot speak into your specific situation. I don't know all the circumstances. So this is not directly at you if you feel like it is, although maybe it is, but not from me at least. Maybe the Holy Spirit is doing that. I want to say a few general things that I believe may benefit you. And I wanted you to receive them as just good and godly advice, and not as, you're doing it all wrong. First, if you always work at 100% capacity, there literally is no margin. Like, take care of your time and energy the way you know you should take care of your money, which is like save up a little bit for a rainy day. If you always work at 100%, there's no margin for anything that's, where extra attention is needed, or a crisis in the family, or whatever. Like, if you always go at 100%, there's no margin left. Second, God gave, hear it again, like in the last couple of Sundays, God gave the Sabbath as a commandment, not as a suggestion. He actually embedded it in the rhythms of creation. He cannot bless you if you move away from that design, if you disobey his direct commandment. So Sabbath is something that we need to do. We need to stop and rest and delight in God at least one full day, 24 hours a week, with no work, paid or unpaid. Failing to rest well will affect your discipleship to him, and also actually your productivity as a worker. Thirdly, you were created for a relationship with God first, for cultivating your family second, and for work third. And that's order of priority. If your job over a longer period of time, not in a week or in a month or even a year or a season, if your work over a longer period of time, and you're the best judge of this, is directly affecting your discipleship to Jesus and the health of your family and the discipleship of your family, you need to ask yourself the question if that is really worth it. And this brings me back actually to the passage where we started in 1 Corinthians, where Paul says to those who are living as slaves, if you can gain yourself the freedom, then avail yourself of the opportunity. And to the free man, he said, you are bought with a high price. Do not become slaves of man in any way. Let's pray. I want to ask the worship team to come up.